An absolute pleasure to be here with both of you, and an honor. We heard a little bit about both of you from your bios, but I'd like to talk to you about your journeys. Let's take this a little bit further. Keith, I want to start with you.
My journey is not a straight line. If anything, it's a nice curvy line that starts with me in school. Thank you. Way younger than I am today. But doing the same thing that I do now, which is I was paying more attention to taking pictures than I was to actually studying. And that took me to law school, and 3 years after law school taught me that I didn't want to be a lawyer, I started taking pictures. And the direction that took was really working with my dad, who allowed me to go to work with him, take a day in the life of a mailman. What I learned many years later was that my dad had wanted to be a photographer. Not something that was possible in his life and his lifetime, but when I decided that's what I wanted to do, my mom was not happy, as most moms would not be, but my dad encouraged me, and years later, I really understood that as part of my truth. I was living his by pursuing a career in photography and later as an editor. Another inspiration for me was Cartier-Bresson, and that came through a public television show that I watched in WNET in New York in the early 80s, and I watched it once, was mesmerized because it was actually a show that had him out in the street and working, and I got to see him work, and that was something that not very many people ever did. I remembered the show, didn't remember much else, and then for almost 20 years tried to find it again and couldn't. But a couple years ago, the New Yorker ran a piece about the pictures. The story told the story of why it was called Why New Jersey. And it was called Why New Jersey because when he decided I wanted to photograph New Jersey, everybody at WNET said, "Why New Jersey?" And for him, the reason totally made sense because it was, for him, New Jersey represented America. And it was an ability to see all of America top to bottom in one place, in one area, and then relate it to the entire country. So years later, I was able to get a look at that, get the transcript, read some of his wonderful thinking, and that has helped propel me and taken me to where I am today. It's an amazing body of work, and I hope you all get a chance to take a look at it.
Elodie, you've inspired so many people in this room, and I'm curious if you could share a bit more with them about your own journey.
Yeah, so somewhat ironically, I started my career as a writer. I have a degree in journalism, and I was originally a writer. And then it was kind of luck that when I was in 2001 in Los Angeles, at the time there weren't a lot of jobs in writing, and so a friend of mine suggested I started working in photography, which was like such an incredible gift and a blessing. And so in terms of my journey, what I thought I would share is like some pictures that that stayed with me during my career and kind of explain where I come from. So I spent many of my years in my career working at Getty Images, as some of you know, and I run a celebrity portraiture division to start with called Contour, and my job at the time was really to help secure some of the big covers for magazines, amongst other things. And one night, on a Thursday night, I got a call from Jodie Kwan, who at the time was one, and is still one of the best visual editors in the business, and she worked at New York Magazine, and she's like, I'm on a super tight deadline, And I need this picture by Henry Ludweiler of Elliot Spitzer. And it's a like straight-on portrait. And she's like, the only thing is, I actually need to write on it. And like, you need to write on it. And she's like, and I said, well, fine. Like, just tell me what you're going to write. And she said, I can't tell you. And you have to know that Henry will agree with me that he's one of the most difficult photographers out there. And so I was like, well, this is really not gonna fly. And so there was a lot of back and forth between me, Henry, New York Magazine. And so they ended up saying, yes, we'll write on it. And actually the person writing on the cover is Barbara Kruger. And so we saw this cover appear. And that was a moment of like, oh my God, yes, like sometimes it just takes one picture and one word and you completely summarize a situation. And that talks to the staying power of photography. So I thought I would share. Elliot Spitzer was the governor of New York at the time and obviously got completely embroiled in the sex scandal that ended up taking him down. And this picture was also a very important moment for me. This is a picture by John Moore of Getty Images. John obviously worked alongside me at Getty and was a close friend. And at the time, actually, I was not at Getty anymore. And I saw this image show up in my feed, in my Instagram feed. And as I'm sure as many of you did, either see it there or on a cover. And I think what struck me right away was how much power this image had, but also what I saw in it, and I think what made me think really hard is that, you know, to take an image like that, it does take the 4 years that John spent at the border. And it does take him spending that much time with the Border Patrol to be able to not only be in that position to take that picture, but actually bring it back. And also the sensitivity of a father to kneel down and take it from the perspective of a child. And I think, you know, that really struck with me in terms of our work at Catchlight is around the importance of being able to create the conditions in which someone can work on something for a long time and those images can be made and inform the public.
Both of you have been involved in some iconic photography, and Elodie, you just pointed out this conversation about trust and being connected in a community. And I wanted to ask both of you, and Keith, we'll start with you, to discuss a little bit about what community engagement means to you today, reaching those broad audiences through community.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to use the word audiences as opposed to singular audience. And that is really one of the key elements that makes this time very different. Because even though we recognize that there are multiple audiences before, we now have the ability to actually meet them and talk with them and engage with them and have them participate in the work that we're doing. I think it's really critical that as journalists, but really as people, we remember that we're representing not just our institutions, but we're representing the stories that those communities can share. And sharing is actually really important. We can be the vehicle for sharing as well as the vehicle for informing. And that is, in a culture that is visually driven, really going to be important to do visually.
Elodie?
I think for me, when we think about, you know, trust building and community engagement, there is so much that has struck me and our team, especially working on our local program where we help local newsrooms tell more stories visually, and we helped place some visual journalists in those newsrooms as staff photographers. I think our bet initially was, okay, we're going to place like 3 photographers in 3 newsrooms in the Bay Area, and we'll probably see that people love to look at images, so they're going to start looking at the images and audience engagement is going to go up. So that was our bet. And it did turn out like that. But in the process, we also learned with our team so much more, which is actually the role of the visual journalist in the community as a trusted messenger, because the visual journalist is in the community, goes to all the ball games, the meetings, the school board meetings, and meets all the people. So it turns out to be the face of the media organization and an active player in the trust building exercise with the community. And so that's something that that we learned that is absolutely essential, especially in like smaller communities.
Both of you have worked, as you pointed out, and Keith with NPR have worked with newsrooms and independent journalists. How do you think of partnerships, local partnerships? And Elodie, you've implied this a bit in your answer, but how do you think about local partnerships as well as national partnerships? Keith?
Partnerships in this day and age of limited resources and way too much to cover are really important. And I think they take the shape of media organizations partnering with other organizations. In the NPR model, it's all of our member stations working together, and NPR as the convener of the work and the distribution, helping to make that possible. But it also means that you have to look other places for partners, and they're not always the places that you assume. They can often be a small organization in a small community that is doing wonderful work that is important to highlight, but also to know that it's just as, it reaches the same audience, if not a more important audience. And I think when we think about partnerships, I think especially about the relationship at the local level. And with member stations at NPR, they own the relationship with our audience, not the national organization. And so as we think about how we build partnerships, if it's national, you should have a local partner. If it's between local organizations, help from a place like NPR, like other publications, to get the word out is also really important. And for individuals, if you're an individual journalist, form a partnership.
Love the idea of not overlooking a potential partnership that could be out there, an alliance that benefits everyone long term. Elodie, what do you think?
I think from our perspective, it was really important. So where we did really see this gap is in understanding how much people are consuming information visually, but that the local media ecosystem either decided to de-invest in that particular practice, or for those new publications that are coming up that are more built on the nonprofit model, and that's the beginning of a very thriving ecosystem, they didn't necessarily have the knowledge. And so based on a lot of research that shows that a lot of the audiences actually do not trust national organizations, but do trust their local media organizations. For us, it was vital to say, okay, well, how do we actually bring high caliber visual journalism to those organizations, and how do we kind of seed or reseed that ecosystem and allow them to engage audiences in that way? So that was one of our really big points of focus. And so today we are partnered with actually 10 local news organizations, but we will expand that to at least 30 and up to 90 by 2027.
A follow-up for that, are there tips that you could have for the photographers who are in the room or those who are looking for partnerships to build that trust? Because as you pointed out, there can sometimes be maybe walls up around, is this someone I can work with? Is this someone I can trust? Is this someone who sees me and understands the value that I bring?
You mean in terms of newsroom partnerships or more? Yeah, I think it's very much about making sure that there is like ongoing conversation and education, especially with editors, in terms of trying to get to the stories at the beginning of the process rather than at the end. I mean, I think that's really what it's about. In terms of building the trust with audiences, we have had some amazing example recently. So, for example, Hiram Duran spent a couple of weekends at a local flea market in Oakland and did portraits, actually, of some of the vendors and some of the public passing through. And that is about building trust and building connection. And it had like the amazing kind of ripple effect of allowing that newspaper to actually get more subscribers to their text messages. They have a very innovative way of delivering. And then that story actually ended up being published by KQED. So, see, it all
It's
comes
a
around.
virtuous circle here. Keith, NPR has to do a lot of similar work with lots of stations, and not necessarily just stations, but individual contributors. How do you think about that trust building, or the tips you could offer?
Yeah, I mean, trust for me equates to spending time. Trust is not necessarily something that you get, it's something that you earn, and you earn it by being present and being respectful. As a photojournalist, one of the things that I learned early on was that I should spend a lot of time before I take any pictures. Talk to people, watch them work, tell them a little bit about myself, and enjoy their company and the present that they live in before I started intruding with my camera. And I think that's so important in this day and age for journalists as individuals, but for organizations. Build the trust by spending the time, not just for your story, not just for the work you're trying to capture, but also because you want to be part of their lives and you'd like them to be an ongoing part of yours. So trust equals time for me. Spend the time.
We are in an interesting moment in the culture. Images are everywhere, visual journalism is everywhere, reportedly. And I'm curious how both of you appraise the state of visual journalism today, particularly in terms of its impact. Elodie, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing, especially with the local program, is that when done right and consistently, visual journalism can really help build trust with audiences and increase the audience of publication. So it has a really vital role to play. Obviously, in an environment, in an overall media environment that's extremely challenged. So this question of us making the case for not just its power but the sustainability in the long run is absolutely key, and that's kind of the campaign that we've been on, and that will keep being on for a while.
Keith.
So I was talking with somebody earlier during the portfolio review, and obviously many of us have been thinking about this for a while. There are like 1 million images, and I don't know how many Instagram creates every second or whatever, but it's nuts. But what we were talking about, I said, one of the things that is interesting is that there are a lot of photographs, but there are not very many narratives. And I think, that's perhaps how we cut through as journalists and as visual storytellers. How do we create stories as opposed to single images that represent what I had for breakfast this morning or where I took my dog for a walk? Storytelling is still the thing that we do and do best. And in cutting through, let's cut through with the stories that matter to our communities, that matter to ourselves, to our families, and hopefully to the nation and to the world. But storytelling, visual storytelling is what we bring to the table. And that's what I think we in the sea of images, we still have to hold on to as the thing that will help us stand out.
Elodie, Keith just mentioned this as well, that there's a lot of algorithms, a lot of influence to develop stories. Are there other ways that we should be looking at visual journalism, being able to break through to those audiences that we'd like to reach?
Yeah, as I said, I think images have the power to go in a lot of places that pure text can't necessarily. So the way in which we have been practicing it, and with our team is really to think through how do we get information or those images in front of the public. And we have done a number of activations So, for example, we took like the images that were produced during the COVID-19 pandemic to SF City Hall, and showed them there for a year and a half, and that's bringing images in new places where the public encounters them and might get curious and not necessarily expect them. And same with public libraries. We worked with in Chicago with the Legler Public Library, and that those images now have moved to the conservatory, and it's really important because they reflect the community, and it's an ongoing dialogue between the community and those images.
Keith, how do you feel we as journalists can better be relevant in these spaces? Elodie, you just pointed out, I think, a really compelling example, which is taking the photography to people directly, being present in a community. How might we be able to do more of this in order to reflect those stories and the power of visual journalism?
Yeah, I think for journalism in general tends to get a bad rap for only being serious and important and sometimes sad and sometimes too involved with the things that are wrong. What I've learned, particularly in my job, because my job is kind of like the man with two heads, I have to think about the very important journalism work that is explaining our world, and then I have to think about keeping people entertained and providing music through NPR Music and Tiny Desk concerts. And I find that the intersection there is that you are doing the things that offset each other. So it's not always about the important stories. Sometimes it's about the fun, and how do we create fun in those spaces so that people have an opportunity to relax and balance their lives. And I think that's what we can also bring to this table, is celebrating the important moments, celebrating the fun, and understanding that those are offset also by the important and sad moments, the important and critical moments, but that those things are intertwined. I have the ability to do that as part of my job. It's not always easy, and it is a little challenging some days, but it also is very important to the audience, and we can recognize the strength of that in just the numbers of people who turn to Tiny Desks as much as they turn to our coverage of climate change.
Elodie, when we're thinking about emotions and photography and visual journalism, what other ways can we be speaking with people? Keith just tapped into, I think, a really compelling one, fun. But what other areas, when you're thinking about photography, should a journalist think about?
I mean, I think it's about really, again, like connection. I mean, a lot of our, I think that there is something about, the way in which the medium is moving to more the creator space. And like, if we think about TikTok and Instagram, and one of our fellows who is here, I think today, Helena, is starting to use TikTok. And I think that, if done right, then it does give people like a certain type of transparency about who the person is that is actually doing the reporting, and a little bit of color maybe about, where they're coming from, what their day is like. I mean, and some context to the work, in which the work, again, is not just dropping on their Instagram feed. And so I think that's actually kind of a fascinating way of doing it, again, when done right. So I think that there is definitely a lot that we can explore in those spaces.
Being able to touch people with photography, with visual journalism, but also giving the viewer, the audience, that sense of who it is, who's bringing them that story.
Yeah, exactly.
Engagement in the community, and to both of your points, investment in the community beyond just, to your point earlier, Keith, being extractive and just showing up with a camera and pointing it out there.
Absolutely.
Elodie, Keith, I want to thank you both for this fascinating conversation, and we're going to have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you both.